Okay, so here we are, part 2, reading the concept of congruence reformulated in terms of experiencing. I have not looked at this since I finished the last video, so let me just skim real quick. Yeah, so congruence basically being the alignment of symbol and experience, right? And I was basically commenting that it seemed as if Gendlin wouldn't agree with Carl Rogers' idea of that, given that Gendlin's whole process model is, in a nutshell, like, it's ongoing, forever ongoing. It's never finished. It's a process. It's not contents, so the symbol can never capture everything. So long as there is life process, there is always more than can be symbolized, and that's what focusing is, the process of symbolizing raw experience step by step. Okay, so part 2, experiencing an addition to the theory, the roles of naturalistic observation and theory. The term experiencing stands for an individual's subjectivity insofar as he can refer directly to it as a momentary felt datum in his phenomenal field. Experiencing individual subjectivity, yeah. So referring to one's own subjectivity as a momentary felt datum in his phenomenal field. So something that you can perceive as a phenomena, right, which is basically literally anything that you can perceive, it's a bit of that, something that you feel. It's interesting that it's an interesting word, datum. In particular, it's standing out to me because it seems like such a snapshot, like an atomic kind of word, whereas Gendlin is always so, the process model is sort of an alternative to thinking atomically about life and experiencing. But yeah, so it's like a snapshot of feeling in a way that you can notice. That is what you are referring back to. That is your subjectivity. Your subjectivity, your subjective experience is your ability to reference directly a snapshot of the feeling within yourself that you can notice. That is experiencing. Okay? Experiencing, therefore, stands for a directly observable, though private, datum of the individual. It is also central in our naturalistic observations of other people. We interpret our observations of others in terms of their private datum of experiencing. Most of our naturalistic observations of persons involve experiencing, private or imputed. Psychotherapy would give us very little observation about which to begin forming scientific concepts if we omit observations that concern experiencing. However, when we move from naturalistic observations to the stage of forming a theory, we must construct precisely defined concepts. At that stage, we must have terms that formulate private and imputed experiencing, but such terms will now have the status of theoretical constructs in our theory. Such terms will thus face in two directions. Backward, they will refer to certain central aspects of the naturalistic observation of psychotherapy with which science must begin. Forward, these terms will function as theoretical constructs. Hypotheses will be formulated with them, leading to new operational procedures and new discriminations of reliably observable behavior. Operational hypotheses can then be tested not through naturalistic or subjectively defined observation, but through reliably defined behavioral observation. Precisely defined behavioral observation is the aim of theory, not its starting point. Oh, interesting. That's a powerful quote. The scientific observations of subjective wow, my mind's all over the place. The scientific method is therefore not altered by a theory which conceptualizes naturalistic observations of subjective experiencing. However, since subjectivity is naturalistically observed to be central in psychotherapy, theory which formulates it is very likely to lead to behavioral research concerning central rather than peripheral aspects of psychotherapy. Okay. This is interesting. This is why I love Gendlin, is that he's not just talking about therapy, but he's talking as a working PhD in philosophy of like, how do we think about this really concretely and accurately in terms of language and concept, rather than just throwing up our hands that this stuff is beyond words and hard to describe. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it is, but let's talk about that and work on it. Right, and that's really one of the wonderful things about him, is that he is sort of bridging the chasm between what would otherwise be just soft, almost woo-woo stuff, spiritual stuff, emotional stuff, and science, right? He's like, yeah, it's very hard to talk about all of that, the former, in any scientific way, because we don't have, concepts. It's hard to build theory around that stuff when it's just sort of wishy-washy, soft, hard to grasp things that are beyond language, and we just let them be beyond language because we don't know how to give language to it. So he's like, well, let's figure out how to give language to it. Let's give language to it, and then let's use that language to further clarify what we are trying to observe in a subjective arena. Right, so it's like doing phenomenology in a way, but then building very like real conceptual models that you can then use theoretically to enhance your ability to observe phenomenologically. Psychotherapy would give us very little observation about which to begin forming scientific concepts if we admit observations that concern experiencing. Right, because you would just be watching two people talk about stuff. And it would just sound like, right, that's the thing, if you don't refer to what's actually happening subjectively for people, then it just sounds like a whole lot of bullshit. It's like, yeah, people might just be making all sorts of shit up. And how do you know one way or the other? And that's what that whole felt sense and resonating with the felt sense is about. It's like, that's how you know if it's bullshit or not. Is it accurate? Does it symbolize your raw experience? I guess that would be a way to define whether something is like genuine and true, is whether it accurately symbolizes raw experience, right? If it doesn't, and you say that that's your experience, knowing that it doesn't represent, knowing that it doesn't symbolize your experience, then that's not true, right? It doesn't mean you can't say it for good reason, but it's not necessarily the truth of your experience. Right, so if we want to go from talking just like describing clinical work, for example, to then forming a theory of that stuff, then you have to build precise concepts. So then you do that, those have a place within your theory now, and so, okay, such terms will thus face two directions. Backwards, they refer. So backwards, they refer, to what originally you were observing to begin with. Right. With the observations with which science must begin. Observations of the real world. And then forward, those terms will function as theoretical constructs. So, they basically can be used as premises for further, right? Then you can do logic with it. Deductive logic or whatever. Like, you can be like, okay, well, I now have these concepts, and now it's like, if this is true and this is true, then maybe that's true. And then you can go explore whether that seems to be the case in subjective experience. And it allows you to refine your observation. Because you're like, okay, well, if this is true and that's true, then this other thing must be true. Is it in my actual experience? And you can look for that thing and then notice whether, I am finding that thing, or I'm finding something slightly different. And what is that thing that's slightly different? And now you have new intricate data, new intricate observations from which to do the same thing over again. Precisely defined behavioral observation is the aim of theory, not its starting point, right? So meaning the defined part is, I think, the most important thing there, is that you don't start with definitions for the things you're observing. That's something you develop over time. But if you're observing in detail, you're going to probably observe things that you don't have definitions for. If you observe and you see nothing that you don't already have a definition for. You've seen nothing new. A definition, you could say, ability to articulate, right? Description for, right? If you can already describe everything that you're observing, then what are you observing? You're observing just the same thing over and over again? Or rather, you're not noticing anything new, so you're not observing very well. Right. Since subjectivity is naturalistically observed to be central in psychotherapy. Yeah. So we observe that subjectivity is central in psychotherapy. Theory which formulates it is very likely to lead to behavioral research concerning central rather than peripheral. Yeah. Okay. B. Naturalistic observations. Naturalistic observation shows that experiencing plays a central role in psychotherapy. In both therapist and client, the stream of directly felt subjective data is central. Experiencing constitutes the therapist's understanding the client. A therapist usually understands a client not in terms of finished concepts, but in terms of a directly felt sense that he understands. He then formulates concepts to convey his felt understanding or to interpret it to himself and to the client. So even, yeah, okay. So the felt sense is important. It's not just the client's felt sense that is important in the therapy room. It's not only important that he or that the client is aware of their own felt sense and attempts to articulate it, but also the therapist, his understanding of the client is more intricate than merely concepts, right? If it's nothing more than he can state in terms of concepts, then it's abstract. It's not actually a concrete observation and experience of the other person, right? If it's just concepts, then it's referring to non-specific, abstracted human. So being another human being in that room and then engaging with and having a interaction with the client, the therapist too is going to have a felt sense. He is also alive. He is experiencing. And for that person, his role, the therapist's role then, is to articulate their felt sense of what they're experiencing and how they're understanding the client. Similarly, the client does not just string words or concepts together. He forms his words on the basis of the directly felt datum he now confronts in his phenomenal field. As he speaks, thinks, feels, and changes, the process of working through his feelings is central in him. He may say much or little. He may think sophisticated concepts or dull approximations. But if there is therapeutic change, it will occur through a working with present feeling. So that's like Gendlin's like big premise, big claim, argument, right? Therapeutic change occurs within experiencing, occurs not conceptually, but as a change in one's actual present moment experiencing. When therapists discuss therapy cases, they speak in terms of naturalistic observations, which involve experiencing. They distinguish, for example, between really being in therapy and intellectualizing. The latter term describes a defense. The client is not really facing his feelings, he is merely using words and concepts. That's a great way to talk about it. It's like using abstraction, right? If you're intellectualizing, if you're using only conceptual stuff to talk about your experience, you're remaining abstract. And if you're doing that internally too, as a way to stay away from becoming aware of your actual experience, then you're skipping the entire point of therapy. Right. And theoretically, I mean, I guess you could attend to your actual experience and then speak more abstractly, speak in concepts if you don't want to share all the details. And Gendlin often encourages something like that in videos I've seen of him working with clients, where he's like, no, you don't have to tell me the details. You can just say, like, I'm experiencing this thing and it's kind of like this, but you don't have to tell me like what the content of that is, like what happened. You don't have to share that stuff. So attending to the intricacy of one's experience doesn't require sharing the full intricacy of one's experience. Is the client speaking from his present experiencing? Do his words describe this present experiencing? Is he directly referring to, facing his present experience? Or is he simply uttering and thinking abstractions about feelings which he does not now feel? Right? Talking about things that are not currently happening. That's basically, another big point. It's like, in therapy, at least in like a focusing oriented therapy, but I guess even at this point focusing didn't exist, so he's referring to like a Rogerian style client-centered therapy. The point is to talk about things, what is happening in experience now. And like Anne Weiser Cornell, for example, she kind of takes that further, and she's like, sometimes what's happening now that you're most aware of is thoughts. And whereas Gendlin was a bit less into paying attention to thoughts, and it's like, well, if you don't have a felt sense right now, but you have a thought, like, and that's what's happening now, well, you can attend to that, and maybe it'll lead you back to a felt sense. So one way or another, it's about what's happening now. But don't just talk about things that are not actually happening at this moment. When a client really grapples with his present experiencing, he is likely to refer directly to it, even though he may not as yet interpret it in concepts. For example, he may say, I don't know what I feel there, but it's sure strong. Or he may say, in that situation I get this big black feeling which just makes me want to run away. Such verbal expressions do not really conceptualize the client's experiencing. They merely point to it. They indicate that the client is directly referring to something in his present experience. So that's interesting, I guess, because when I see something like, well, this is like more, right? It's like, this is really just being like, there's something there and it's intense. But this one, it's like, okay, this big black feeling just makes me want to run away. So it's like you're giving it a size and a color, and then you have this uh, impulse in relation to it, right? I would have said that those are like handles, big black feeling just makes me want to run away, because those are things that you could say, and then, I mean, I guess he's not contradicting what I'm saying, I guess, but you could say this, right, and be like, it's big and black, right, or it just makes me want to run away, and you can check back to see if is that really the best way to describe it, so those sound to me like handles. But maybe what Gendlin is pointing to here is that handles are not necessarily the same thing as conceptualizing the client's experience. So I guess I don't entirely know for sure what it exactly means, at least for Gendlin, what it means to conceptualize something. Right? If to do this is not conceptualizing, what exactly is conceptualizing? Okay. Present experiencing is physically felt, like hunger or pain. Often it is not conceptually known, yet it always has implicit or felt meaning. Implicit meaning is a phrase which describes the fact that by directly referring to feeling, an individual can form concepts to describe it. It is not just feeling in general. It is always this very specific moment of feeling, which only certain concepts seem to fit. Furthermore, although present experiencing is often felt as one, this way I feel, it can usually be differentiated and explicated as many different feelings and meanings. One physical feeling may later be said to have implicitly included many ideas, experiences, assumptions, or attitudes. Yeah, he's hinted at this in other papers I've read, but he definitely talks about this more in the process model of, just this, like, our experience is infinitely differentiable, basically, infinitely articulable, right? Like, it's initially undifferentiated. It just is everything that we're experiencing. But you can go in and differentiate it and find different handles and find different intricacies to it endlessly, right? I think I talked about that in a previous video where talking about that, if you're writing history and you're looking back at the undifferentiated past, right, which is just literally everything that's ever happened up until this moment, there's an infinite amount of ways that you could articulate that, right? Even just one event you can talk about in so many different ways, right? You can talk about your own experience of one event in a million different ways, let alone all the different people who are involved in that and all the different ways you can tell the story. So that raw experience is not initially differentiated, and you can do that to your heart's content. You can spend the rest of your life doing that. So that's kind of what he's getting at, or the connection I'm making here. Right, the more you attend to it, the more intricacy you discover, basically. Right, that's what the whole process of going from, like, oh, it's something, to then finding a handle, checking back, and if the handle doesn't work, you now know it's like, okay, well, that was clearly close because I thought it might work, but actually there's more intricacy there. So you're like going from something to extremely intricate understanding of what that something is. These naturalistic observations are central to psychotherapy. Whenever therapy is discussed in a practical sense, no one is surprised at the mention of these observations. One cannot say much about an individual case or about the actual practice of psychotherapy in any school of therapy without referring in some way to the client's and the therapist's present experiencing. I propose, therefore, to define experiencing so that the definition may function as a theoretical construct. However, our definition will profit from our naturalistic observations. The theory stands a much better chance of leading to significant research if it is the best possible conceptualization of our naturalistic observations. Wow, okay, this is cool. I feel like I'm like coming across in like a momentous moment in Gendlin's writing. He's like, okay, let's literally define experiencing so that we can use it theoretically. But you know what? I'm going to stop here. Right? Because otherwise, yeah, I'm going to stop here. And we'll pick up next time with the theoretical definition of experiencing. Okay? So, that was fun. Thanks for watching if you're watching. And have a great weekend. All right. Bye-bye.